Well, we moved here in 1958, and I was not real aware of being Jewish or any discrimination or any difference or any separation. And that was the way it was all the time I grew up. Unless I was just being oblivious, I never ran into any discrimination that I'm aware of. I read a book recently. When I was first asked to do this presentation, I first reacted that I didn't really have much to say. I'm not really a very observant Jew, or somehow not very aware of it. But in the interim, I read a book that a friend of mine gave me, I think, to make a Christian out of me. It's a book by a Jewish guy who became a Christian, and there was so much in there that was so interesting to me. His reflections on growing up Jewish in New York, I think Long Island, in a half-Jewish community. And one thing he pointed out that made me more aware was that he did have Jews all around. He did have that identity and that way of life all around him, and that provided a contrast to the other half of the community and the other half of his friends who were not Jewish. Well, I didn't have that. We always lived in little Christian or Catholic communities. Hi, Alan. By the way, is this not a beautiful place to have a convention? That's the owner there, Alan. I did not have any of that, so I had very little awareness. I think there's such a thing as being Jewish culturally, and our family had that, obviously, maybe a certain language edge or comedic edge or something. So I have some of that consciousness, but my parents were not extremely observant, I would say. We went to temple in Santa Fe every now and then for holidays, and my brother and sister were bar mitzvahed, and I was not. I was just too resistant about it, or not interested. My dad finally just gave up. But my parents were Jewish and glad to be Jewish, and they spoke Yiddish. My mom did not look Jewish at all. She was, if I may use that idea of not looking Jewish, she was a high fashion model in New York. She was a Powers model, and because she didn't look Jewish, I guess she got to hear all the slurs and all the comments at that time. But as I say, there is a certain Jewish way that obviously I picked up on, and my best friends in college were Jewish, and still are my best friends. And I was, the best compliment I got in the past year or so was somebody was talking to me, and it turned out she was assuming I was from New York, which I'm not. And I took that as a great compliment. I always felt very at home in New York from the time I was a tiny kid. There's a story in our family. My mom says she once asked a friend of my sister's who was Hispanic, why do so many of the other kids have trouble with Hispanic versus Anglo-Hispanic fights and arguments? Why don't my kids get into that? And the friend who is Hispanic said, well, there are the Spanish, and there are the Anglos, and then there are the Terrs. And so somehow we had our own little niche, and part of it was probably due to my dad being a doctor, and that is or was a very respected profession. And also we were good friends with the people like the Teicherts had paved the way here by being so much members of the community and speaking Spanish and being so involved in the community. And in fact, I have a story about Milton Teichert. Has Milton Teichert been mentioned anywhere in any presentations here? Well, I have a story I want to tell maybe afterwards or in the Q&A about Milton that I think is just hilarious, but it's not directly related to my presentation. Anyway, as I grew up, we were in school. Of course, I loved the Christmas carols. I loved Christmas music. We celebrated Christmas as well as Hanukkah. And there was no worry, no awareness or worry that I was aware of in our family about making that distinction, worried about being recruited as Christians or anything. And as a matter of fact, my parents have always been very inclusive about everything. And if somebody had announced one day they were going to become a Christian, they probably wouldn't have made a big deal about it. But I was also, and so I'm not, and I haven't been as aware of Jewish rituals and customs as probably many people here, and as I should be after a lifetime of exposure to it. But I was also, to be fair, I was also incredibly ignorant about what Christianity was about. I remember that when I was about 17, believe it or not, I was riding past the church with my mom, and I noticed the cross, and I said, what is that all about? What is the gist of this Christianity thing? What is the cross about? She said, well, Jesus was crucified for, being a rabble-rouser, and on the cross, and supposedly he rose a few days later. I said, wow, there you have it. Well, somehow I'd made it to age 17 or 18 without ever understanding that basic narrative, in spite of my supposedly high IQ and being editor of the school paper and everything. But I always have been very aware of the Holocaust since high school. A friend of mine gave me some reading, and I was very immersed in that. And that is very much the way I view everything, including current events, with that kind of hyper alertness about demagoguery and propaganda and how a whole country can turn. So that's been my focus in a lot of my work, including my videos. I have one of the foundation-funded documentaries I did was interviews with New Mexico Holocaust survivors, which I have on DVD, by the way, if anybody is interested. And I have a pending project that sums all this up, kind of from a lifetime of thinking about it, called A Personal History of Propaganda, if I get funding for it, that is. And in the time I have left, I did want to read this thing from a book that by the way, I take it you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I had a song in my compendium of music and in this book called the Goldberg Family Band, from a project I did called Chicken Stock, which is a Jewish parody of Woodstock. But anyway, this is, I don't know how this will go over in written form, but you have to imagine it in a kind of a bluegrass folk music type of vein. And it's kind of an imaginary take on my growing up, very imaginary. Uncle Abe, he was a tailor on New York's Old West Side. And Uncle Morty had a deli right next door, and they were both real satisfied. But Mom and Dad were different. Their souls were the wandering kind. They loaded us into a station wagon, left the suburbs way behind. We'd travel around to little towns and seek us out some Jews, and they'd get on the telephone and tell the others the news. They'd say, y'all come running, the second coming is very close at hand. Remember, they were here last year, the Goldberg Family Band. And we'd sing, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. This is all with bluegrass accompaniment in the musical version. Big Brother played the guitar and the jaw harp now and then, and I'd keep time by tapping on a Mogan David bottle with a fountain pen. Little sister blew the ram's horn till it made her blue in the face. Mama sang the alto and Daddy sang the bass. And we sang, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Come Hanukkah, we'd gather round that fireplace so bright, and thank the Lord we lived in a place where we were free from fright. No Nazis, no pogroms, nobody telling us what to do. There's a whole lot to be thankful for when you're a New Mexico Jew. And we sang, Praise to the Lord, to whom all praise is due, forever and ever. There's the picture of the Goldberg Family Band by a famous artist. Anyway, I do have the book available and the CD and the CD of the interview. Thank you.
And then I have another comment for Jim. Jim, you have a role model on your right. You can still get a bar mitzvah. And I've known Jim for a really long time, and his family. And also, Jim, the comment about looking Jewish, you can look around. I don't know what that means because I never really knew what looking Jewish looked like. I mean, you could look at the three of you on the panel and we all look different. And I teach my daughter that too, by the way. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry is this on?
Yes.
I'm sorry if I offended you with the concept of looking Jewish. I know some people don't like that, but.
I'll just bring the mic back, but please go ahead.
I didn't want to neglect or forget to tell my Milton Teichert story, may I?
Yes.
Well, this really has nothing to do with the subject. It's just something that's struck me as very hilarious as I've recalled it the past few years. Because when you're a kid, almost anything you experience just seems normal. But sometime recently, I realized how funny this was, and I make a little shtick out of it. But I want to tell you this thing that Milton used to do, like name anything or anything, any word, anything.
Banana.
Someone said banana.
Bananas. Oh my! Don't tell me about bananas. I'll tell you about bananas. You don't know nothing about bananas. I'll tell you about bananas. Oh my. Milton used to do that all the time. And as a kid, I never thought how funny it was. I do now, though, infinitely funny. I wanted to add one thing that I kind of forgot to mention in my talk, if I may. And that is talk about not identifying as Jewish so much. I mean, I do identify as Jewish, and I'm proud of it. And I'm always reminded of a friend of mine whose father, their family is very Jewish, very observant. And I asked her one time if her father was really personally very observant. She said, well, he's really more of a Catholic in the sense that he was taken as a child and hidden away in a convent to evade the Nazis, and obviously he got out and came to this country, but he's just kind of very Jewish out of spite in the sense that he doesn't want anybody telling him he can't be Jewish, and for himself and all the people who paid for being Jewish, he insists on being Jewish and being observant. And as for me, I would say, I was talking about the kind of maybe cultural aspect of being Jewish, which I am very much, I guess. But I'm really more interested in the social justice aspect of it. And my parents, in that aspect of Jews or Jewishness. And my dad, before he became a Republican, for some reason, when he moved here, he was a Democrat. My mom said the only time she ever saw him cry was when FDR died. And I kind of cherish that secondhand memory. And my mom, of course, is just always been a Democrat, if not a Bolshevik. Those of you who know her. And that's the part that is most alive for me, I guess I would say. One other thing I meant to mention very briefly is that I was talking about how a lot of this stuff about what's going on in this country and what I've always been concerned about, I hope to put into a video essay called A Personal History of Propaganda. But I also did a little personal essay I want to tell you about in case you want to look it up. I think it's on YouTube as well as Facebook. It was called Why I Take Racism Personally. And it's kind of raw, but it's about that. And it's about thinking about my nieces and nephews. My nieces and nephews and their kids are all mixed, are all rainbow types. And so I have extra reason to be very leery of racists and white nationalists and all that. And I put that into an essay that I have on Facebook and possibly YouTube called Why I Take Racism Personally, if you want to look it up.